Hey, it's Daphne from BlueQuarry.com, and today I thought I would share a video that shows how I created a gouache portrait painting. Now, in full disclosure, this is a new medium for me, and it's the second ever portrait that I painted using gouache as the medium. Now, if you're not familiar with gouache, it's a water-based paint, very, very similar to watercolor. The only difference is really that it has more of an opaque finish to it. So it allows you to, cover up mistakes. It allows you to blend colors a little bit, almost a little bit too much for what I was hoping to achieve with this painting, but just like any medium, if you're starting out with something new, you need to just sort of work with it and figure out the different properties and how to use them to your advantage. So that's what I'm in the process of doing here. Now, the inspiration photo that I'm using, you can see in the top right-hand corner there, is from an app called Sketchy. I'll include the information in the description box below. I love this app. I would highly recommend you check it out if you are interested at all in learning how to paint faces, because they have a huge supply of artists and inspiration photos to check out. So yeah, well, you'll see when you get there exactly what I mean, but it currently is my favorite app. So I started out with a quick sketch that I did with just a regular pencil to get the proportions right. And I find that that is probably the most important thing in getting the painting to turn out right, is to get the features proportionally correct. You want them in the right location, and you want them the same size relative to everything else on the page. So you do want to spend some time getting that right. You don't want to spend too much time on the details with your line work, because once you start painting it, that is all going to get covered over. So you don't want to spend a whole lot of time working on the details and then try to be too precious about saving it as you're adding the paint. The paint will sort of obliterate all that. So use your drawing just to get your proportions and your layout right, and work on the details in your painting itself. Now, I'm working in one of my handmade journals that happens to have 80-pound drawing paper. I think I selected it just because it was handy and it was something I had been working on earlier that day. But drawing paper really isn't designed to work well with water media. Certainly not if you're doing the kind of painting that I'm doing here. I have used this before to do my mandalas. Sometimes I will paint an even quick wash of gouache to create my background, and then I use my pens to draw the mandala shapes on top. And for that type of an application, it works fine, works really well. I don't get too much warping. One of the great things about making your own handmade journals is that you can mix the paper up. You can mix watercolor paper and drawing paper and even different color papers, so that you have a variety of choices when you start your project. Unfortunately, I didn't choose one of my books that had different papers in it, and going forward, I definitely will be using watercolor paper in place of drawing paper when making these gouache portraits. So you probably noticed the first thing I did was to lay down a base coat on her face of a color that is pretty close to skin color. I believe it was a combination of yellow ochre and a little bit of white, and I may have put a little bit of, sienna in there, burnt sienna. The paints I'm using are by a company called Reeves. I will also include that information in the description box. It's really my only experience with gouache, so I can't tell you if it's, great quality compared to others, but you can see the results that I've gotten with it, so I'm happy. Okay, so I laid down a base coat on her face. I added some blue streaks for her hair. The reason I did that is I want to make this a little bit more stylized. I'm not going for a truly realistic portrait. I want to have some interest in there, and I just love that color blue. And I'm probably going to end up using up this blue before I use anything else. It's called Blue Lake, and I just think it's beautiful. I was inspired by some other paintings I saw online where they used blue in sort of it's like a highlight in the dark areas, if that makes sense. So it's a shadow highlight. So my dark areas are primarily, I think the burnt sienna is what I was using for my darks. I don't know if I used a lot of black in this. I think just a little bit. I used a little bit of black just to darken up, just to get some of the deeper shades. Oh, and I did, I guess, use black to do the deep shadows in her eyes, eyebrows, the nostrils, and a little bit around the mouth, and a tiny bit under the neck you'll see in that shadow area. I also use, you'll see at the end, some pen in here to add detail. So the struggles I had with this painting were that I was going for sort of a more stylized look, as I mentioned, and that's why I was adding the blue. But what I found is that when I was trying to add some like more significant color changes on her face, I wanted to really lighten up some areas and get that painterly effect on her face. And since I had laid down an initial layer of that skin tone color, anytime I went on top of it with straight white, I found that I was reactivating the paint beneath it, and it would just immediately blend. And even though it's not even a dark color here, I wanted to get some really bright whites on there, and I just was not able to do it. And unfortunately, I spent a lot of time in this painting adding more color and adding more color to her face and trying to bring out that lightness, and was not successful at it. So while the full painting took me about an hour to do, I'd say, a good 20 minutes of it was probably wasted trying to get the whites whiter, and then getting a lot of wrinkling on my page because I was applying so much paint to it. And, once the water gets in there, it does tend to warp the paper, especially if you're using a lighter weight paper. If I were to do this over, absolutely, I would go with a heavier 140-pound watercolor paper, and I might block in some of those white areas first and avoid them with the medium tone gouache. I'm not sure. It's really all dependent on the final look that you're going for here. In the end, I was happy with this painting, so I don't have too many complaints, other than the fact that I worked so hard to try to get a look that I didn't achieve. But I was okay with the way it turned out in the end. I was happy with it, especially since I'm just starting out with this medium. So I know that there are a lot of artists out there who just create beautiful portraits, and I'm just starting in this medium. So some of the advice I give you today may be different than advice that I would offer, a year or 2 years into this, once I've had a chance to really explore it further. But I do think that there's a benefit to hearing what a beginner experiences as they're going through it, because I think a lot of us, as we're just starting out with new mediums, have a different experience than we do once we get very familiar with it. And it's easy to sort of forget the struggles that you had when you were just getting started, and it's a little bit frustrating to see someone who just kind of whips out a beautiful painting with apparently no effort whatsoever, no struggles whatsoever. And, it feels a little bit overwhelming for us beginners. So sometimes it is kind of nice to see somebody who's just learning like you are. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot of other things to offer other than you may notice a few breaks in this painting, or times where the painting goes from looking very wrinkly and then it suddenly gets flat. And that's just because I struggled with, like I said, the warping. And so there were a few times in there where I would dry the painting and then I would take it upstairs and literally put it on my ironing board and iron it to get it flat. And for the most part, that did help a lot. The problem with warping, not only is it, does it not look attractive, in the end, it tends to collect the liquid paint. So if you're adding more paint, it kind of wants to migrate to those low spots in the paper. And so you end up with maybe not necessarily the look that you were going for. So I did need to do that periodically. Again, if I had chosen 140-pound watercolor paper, that would not have been an issue. One other thing I want to mention is every single painting I have done, whether it is with gouache or acrylic or watercolor, whatever the medium may be, it always seems to go through what I call an ugly stage. And every single time, no matter how many times I do it, I always get to the point where I just kind of want to just stop and trash it and start over again. And I think the best piece of advice I can give to someone who is just starting out is to find the confidence in yourself to push past the point where you're judging your painting before it's done, and just keep going, because you're going to surprise yourself. And I really think that that's what separates people who feel like they have no artistic ability from those who are able to constantly produce work that they're proud of showing. It's knowing this little secret that everything sort of goes through its cycle, and eventually you can bring it to a point where you're proud of it. So keep working at it, keep going, and just give yourself that amount of leeway to make mistakes and move on. So here you see me getting out my pens. I have a black pen. It's a Uni-Ball Uni-Ball Deluxe Micro, and my new favorite white opaque pen, which is a Uni-Ball Signo. I just love getting out my pens. I love the effect that they have on the final look of the painting. I love that they give me that extra bit of control to get the lines exactly where I want them and add the lights that I wasn't able to get with the paint alone. And I just love this part of the painting. When you're adding those final details, that's to me when the painting comes to life. Adding those little catch lights on the eyes, adding the highlights on the lower lip, just defining the eye a little bit better and adding some of those deeper deeps, the little strands of hair. For me, it's those little details that can take a so-so painting and turn it into something that looks really, really impressive. Here you see me adding a few more touches of paint to add some shadows under the mouth, under the nose, and around the edges of the face, just to add more depth and interest and really make this painting complete. As I finish up the painting, I just want to take the time to thank you for watching. And if you are interested in learning more about any of my projects or my courses, please check out my website, bluequarry.com.